So, yeah, the homework was pretty good. I mean, a couple were like really good answers and stuff. There's one person that went to Ghana for a class trip or something. She's gonna talk about that at some point. Wilson's her last name. Oh, okay, all right. Yeah. Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be really good to just see kind of what's going on there. I haven't been to Ghana, so it'd be interesting to see. I know it's supposed to be safe, like kind of a safe place to go. So anyway, so that'd be good whenever you want to do it. Then let's see. Why don't I just get that going? I'm gonna try to manage my time better in that other class so I can get down here faster. Yeah, we don't really need to go through this, do we? It's kind of like your opinion. Yeah, the Chat GPT is pretty good to play around with for like, I don't know if you've used it for classes and stuff, but it helps you kind of formulate answers to things in a logical way. So if you get their answer and compare it with your answer, and you can kind of, it doesn't give like committal answers. Like I'm asking you, like how you're going to fix a world or something it's too open-ended for it. But basically it's nice to see how to logically present something. So I think it's pretty useful to play around with. If you use it to answer something, they'll say that you used it, so I know kind of where things are going. But I won't deduct anything, but basically it'd be good to know kind of what's happening. So any questions on that homework or? Okay. It was kind of easy, but some people put a lot more time into it than others. I don't know. It's not really an answer to that, but I think it's because you wanted to, or hopefully. Let's see. So I should already have, I don't think I've changed this. That's not what I wanted. Like this. So I'm trying to get some Nigerians to come in, but so far I haven't identified any victims to do it. So let's see how that goes. Last year I had, in the grad class before this, I had like 4 Nigerians. So it was pretty convenient. They could just come down here, But this year there's no Nigerians in that class for some reason. So I'm not sure why. Maybe the economy collapsed or something. So anyway, I'll try to get some people to come in. And we'll have something about Ghana at least. And then, anyway, so I wanted to go through the setup like this week, just kind of like the setup for sorry. Just kind of the setup for how to make like a home get rid of this. Which I'm not, last time I didn't record it, and I got a message from somebody, but I didn't pick up on it. So that was kind of a problem. So if you're listening and can't hear or something, call me. I gave my number, right? And then otherwise call someone else in the class too if I don't pick up. But anyway, so yeah, this solar, I mean, there's a lot of these solar, these are kind of interesting to look at. So, but these are concentrated solar. So there's a field of mirrors, right? And then there's a tower, and then there's liquids, there's a molten salt in the middle. And that molten salt goes to these 2 tanks. And they then basically use a molten salt to drive a steam plant. Steam electric generating plant is attached to it. Right, so that's one way to do it. This is in Nevada. This is in Morocco. So they have one of those, and then they have a bunch of solar fields. So it turns out the solar panels are more efficient than this kind of mirror setup. So it turns out they're not really building these anymore. It's concentrated solar. And mostly they're just going to photovoltaic, just like fields of photovoltaics. So Morocco's like right at the edge of the Sahel, and they got pretty big population density. So they got kind of close enough to the population to use solar like that. So that's one way to do it. And that's going to involve basically big government or some kind of UN or something helping out. This facility was the UN helped pay for it. So basically this is large organized projects, and then this is centralized power. So this is going to feed to a grid. So there's kind of disadvantages to that when you don't have a government to kind of police the grid, for instance. So all people are going to be tapping into the wires. And then also this tends to be like the power is going to go to the big cities, so it's not going to the individual villages. And the villages are dispersed, like small energy users, right? And they're mostly using wood and things, and whatever bushes you can chop up to burn. So fires, burning is kind of like the main power source. So some kind of off-grid thing is pretty useful in Africa, at least. Here, this isn't as useful because we have a pretty reliable grid. And basically, what you'll find out in the homework this week is that of this system, so the panels are cheap, really cheap now. And then these electronics, like the charge controller and the inverter, are kind of like a little bit more expensive. But by far, the most expensive thing in this is the battery, like a battery bank. It's like 4, I think, is a battery bank. So it goes from, so this is all DC. So the photovoltaics are basically producing something like a battery. So you can't exactly turn them off. And then they're producing a DC voltage, which means the transmission at low voltages degrades quickly. There's a lot of resistance. So AC is more efficient at low voltage. At super high voltage, DC becomes better. So basically, there's a transition at, I think it's like hundreds of kilovolts that they're using for the high voltage, like intercontinental DC transmission. And then the ACs. So these are going to be like in the tens to hundreds of volts. So this isn't a huge power. So basically, the longer you run the line in DC, you're going to lose out until you get to an inverter that's going to convert to AC. And you can run the AC lines further, right? And also, most of the utilities and things that you use run on AC. Like you won't be able to find a DC TV set or something, except that your computer is DC, like your laptop is DC. So you're converting with an inverter back to DC when you go to plug in your computer into the wall, right? So you kind of go DC, AC, DC, when you go into some devices, like personal devices. Anyway, so this is kind of the setup for the system. You can also have like a diesel generator backup or some other kind of system like a turbine. Basically, this is usually also going to some big grid system. Like people don't have their own turbines usually, right? Mostly those are going to a grid. So here, like because the highest cost is a battery, then if you can get rid of the battery, the whole system drops in cost. So like if you want to produce a 15 kilowatt, it's going to be something like 6 or 8 normal size solar panels coupled together, and that would be kind of enough to charge a car or something. And if you're going to run your house, you probably need like 10 solar panels, and then you'd be selling that back to the Duke or wherever the electric generating company is. So you'd have an inverter that was owned by Duke, and they control the AC that comes out of it to match the grid electricity. Right, so anyway, this is just a list of kind of the components that you need to think about for photovoltaics. And then, so the first thing, I guess, if you say like we did development work in Ethiopia. So basically we installed some of these things. So first thing is like figuring out like what the costs are, like cost the whole system out, and then figure out what the cost is to buy like an LED TV versus a conventional TV, a tube TV or something, right? Or to replace all the incandescent lights with LED lights and things, right? So basically, it's cheaper sometimes to just replace all the electronics than it is to buy more solar panels, right? Especially when you consider the whole system, and if you have to have batteries to back everything up, right? So the idea is like, the first thing you need to do in these systems is kind of consider like, can you reduce your costs, like put insulation in, like reduce your powered needs is like the first step that you need to take in these, right? So insulation, buy things like replace equipment that could use less electricity, right? And then basically after that you figure out what the power need is for the system, because you're going to spec out like everything in the system based on the power consumption. So the batteries, the size of the inverter, the charge controller, everything is going to be sized to whatever the consumption is. And the consumption is going to change with the time of day. So you need to map out and with the season. So if you're using this for heat or something like that, basically the lighting needs also change with this time of season. So basically, and also maybe you spend more time indoors, so you consume more electricity in the winter, right? So anyway, you have to map out as a function of time of day and also as a function of time of year. And then you're going to design the system around the peak usage, right? So if you could also like adjust your lifestyle to reduce the peak usage at that particular time. Like if there's just 1 hour of the day when you're using a blender and a coffee maker and air conditioning and the dryer and whatever, and you might just say like, instead of paying twice as much for the battery bank, I'm going to just not use the dryer when I'm using the blender or something like that. Somehow work out your usage so it's going to be different, right? So anyway, these are all kind of issues that you deal with when you're setting up a system, like how you're going to actually manipulate the different features so you minimize your cost in this, right? So then after that, you have to figure out like where, so if it's in a village or something like that, then you have to worry like if little kids are going to be throwing rocks or whatever, right? Or they're going to somehow trip on the wire and then get electrocuted. Or right. So the battery bank is like a big safety issue because it potentially can produce hydrogen. So it can potentially have an explosion. And it's also got like voltages that could be dangerous. So basically you need to have some kind of safety consideration to the location of everything. And then you also have to consider then like how you fence things off to protect people, right? Make sure that it's safe. And then the distances, bouncing that off with the distance so you don't have like resistive loss on like cables and things. Then also like for solar panels, there's programs that can calculate the best location, right? So you generally like, if you're in the north, you're going to be facing the panels to the south. So south facing roof is the best thing to use. But if you're at the equator, then basically you're facing straight up and all year round. So the sun is always like straight up. So this kind of issue of tilt and variability with the year is an issue there, which makes like the Sahel and stuff in Africa like a perfect place because the equator kind of runs right through there. So it's like, it's an ideal place to get a flat energy production from that geometry, like both in terms of the year and also the day. So things are ideal there actually, except that it's hot. So colder is better for photovoltaics. Anyway, and then you have to consider like the battery, like the ventilation for hydrogen and things like that. Let's see. So yeah, then you have choices. Like we've done like a lot of these. So basically we've done a thing, something like this for a well, so you just, in a well, the storage is actually, you don't need any battery storage. You just use the water, pump the water up into a tank. And then the tank is like the battery storage. So during the day, the sun shines on the panel, it goes through an inverter, runs usually an AC pump, insertion pump in the well, it just pumps the water up into a tank. And then the tank stores the water. So basically, whenever you want running water, you have running water from that. Right. So that means the system's going to be a lot simpler. All you need to have is you don't need a battery bank. You need a charge controller, which prevents like charge going from the system back into the panels. And you need an inverter because the pumps are usually AC. Right. So you just need like 3 components of this if you're running a well. But you need a pump too. Right. So that's like a simple, no battery storage. You can get a DC pump. Basically, they don't last as long as an AC pump. Right? So basically, and they don't work as well. So basically, you usually have an inverter. Anyway, without battery or inverter, just with PV is like a lawn light. So we've done that too. Like we assembled these basically lights for a school where it's just a small solar panel and a cell phone battery, then an LED light, kind of in a water bottle, and on a pole to make it into like a street light. Right. So that just has a circuit that charges. Oh, it does have a battery. So it has a circuit that charges a battery when the sun's shining on the panel, which you can make yourself. Like those aren't hard to make. We actually soldered those things together. But so it's possible to do that. So it has no inverter. It's all DC. There's no AC in it at all. Right. The LED runs off DC also. And then with the inverter, without battery, that would be like an AC pump for a well. That's like a well system also. And then this is with battery, and then in this case they have like electronics, DC electronics they use, like RV electronics. You can buy an RV refrigerator and things that run off DC directly. So then you can use a battery and not buy an inverter to do inversion. The problem is that the stuff kind of looks like camping equipment. So nobody really wants to use that. People want something nicer than that. This is something we did. So there's this school in Ethiopia, right? So this school was built by the Cubans. So Ethiopia went through these cycles of different. So they were actually communist, and they became capitalist. So basically, they were an empire first. The U.S. was friendly then. In fact, it was during the Kennedy era, and then basically the emperor was killed brutally, and then a kind of Stalinist took over. So they were friends with Cuba then. So this is near a university. So before, when it was an emperor, the U.S. had interactions. We set up universities there. So we had the university, Haromaya University, is actually founded by Oklahoma State. So they have all this orange stuff, just all the symbolism of Oklahoma State University in the middle of Ethiopia. And then anyway, after when the Derg took over and killed the emperor and became Stalinist, then let's see. Nope, it's not one of you guys. It's a message, but because last time someone sent a message and I didn't turn on the Zoom. But anyway, so the Stalinists took over and the Cubans came in and they did weird. They bought. All right, so these go back to the 60s, all these benches and the chalkboards. Those were all bought by the Cubans, And the Cubans also built in the village. They built they wanted to have factory assembly in the villages, so they went and built little factories. Cuba's a small country, but they went to all over Africa basically and doing this stuff. So anyway, they built little kind of buildings where they could do hand assembly for factory work to kind of do the things that you guys talked about in the homework, start little companies. So this is in the early 70s. So they were there a while. Anyway, so and that was the last time anybody spent any money here. It's yeah, so the stuff's still the same stuff, it's all cobbled together. Anyway, so they have no lights in the classrooms. All right, and they have 3 teachers, and I think they had 500 students in this school. Right, and everyone's barefoot. So they were pretty desperate for anything. So they had no running water, too. So there's 3 or 4 of this kind of rooms, Anyway, so that's kind of the situation way down a dirt road somewhere. But the area is like beautiful, it's really a gorgeous area. So you see this, it's poor, But then next to this are all these chat fields where they grow a drug that they export to the Arab countries, which is like a leaf and has to be eaten within 24 hours of picking. So it's like coca kind of, but something that they have in Africa. Anyway, so those people are rich that have these coca plants or whatever, these chat plants that grow right next to the school, like right up to the school. So the kids walk barefoot through the fields and they're picking this drug plant and chewing it on the way into school, And then, anyway, given the conditions, like they're doing really well. Like they're teaching basically similar stuff to what my kids were learning in Cincinnati, So the subject matter that they teach is pretty similar. And these kids go on and they'll learn chemical engineering at the university, pretty similar level. So given the conditions, it's kind of hard to believe. I mean, one thing, it's always nice there. Like the weather is always perfect because you're at like 12,000 feet and it's right at the equator. It's like absolutely the perfect atmosphere. Like it's beautiful every day. So they don't get winter or anything. So you can have like everything's open, but basically you don't need like windows. There's no bugs or anything. I mean, there's spiders, big spiders, but basically you don't need windows. So you can just live like kind of partly outdoors. It isn't a big deal, right? You don't need like hallways and things, enclosed hallways. So anyway, so it could look like if you imagine this in Ohio, it wouldn't be a very good situation, but there it's actually like livable. You can do this, because of the climate and the soil is like so rich, you can grow anything there. It's like if you look where they've dug wells for the animals, and you can look at the edge of the well, they've dug right in an open pit well, and you can see where the topsoil goes down. And like in Ohio, the topsoil goes down like a foot, and that's it. And after that is like clay. Here, like it went down like 20 or 30 feet of topsoil, and then they have 3 growing seasons. It's like it's an excellent place to grow stuff. Unfortunately, they're growing drugs, It's like, but they sell anyway. They make money off that, So there's plenty of money to pump water up the hill to water the drug plants, but there's no money to put a well in for the kids in the school to wash their hands. So you wonder, like, what are you doing there? I mean, really, like you're donating time and stuff to the people, and they're really happy to get it. But you wonder, like, what is going on? Sometimes. Anyway, so anyway, yeah, there's some stuff about Ethiopia here. Anyway, we put in these simple, just a solar panel and then a light that's got a battery built into it. This is a big deal for them. So we got a bunch of these and we put them into that school. These are Ethiopian students, like chemical engineering students, who are helping out with it. So basically, this is not during the school time. This is just like the kids that are hanging out near the school. It's like this isn't the total population of that school. It's like a huge population of kids. I don't know. It's interesting to interact with them, but you can see like it's down. You drive down a dirt road, and finally you get to a road where you have to walk down a road. Anyway, so that's kind of the way that is.
How long does a solar panel like that last?
All right, so I went back there like 10 years later or something, and they were still using it. So I guess forever. It's pretty weird, That said, there's a guy from Atlanta that was doing this and putting in solar panels in Ethiopia, and he put in these like big panels and stuff in a village somewhere. It's partly religious that he was doing. Anyway, he said he went back and the thing had stopped working. They were using it as like a dining room table. It's like basically these are foolproof, I guess. I mean, I don't know. I would think that would break eventually, but they were still using it. You can also use this to charge. Like these things have a little cable you put a USB in and charge your cell phone, and that's actually a bigger problem because they literally from this village, they literally walk 20 miles to go charge your cell phone, and then walk back 20 miles. Like they were routinely doing that. So and you had to pay. You find a little stall somewhere in the village, And now you have to pay someone to use the charger and then wait there while it charges. So having something that could charge the phone in the ceiling, that was pretty useful. And it's cheap, these are pretty cheap to get. And we just bought those in Ethiopia at that time, then yeah, so this is another thing we did. So this was like big plans. We did some design work, and it was like multiple trips. So they said like they had no water. The well had gone dry, So basically it's like just the solar panel is all you needed to run a pump. So we had to dig a well. That was a nightmare. So we had to hire someone to dig a well. It was pretty screwed up. And then finally he put the well under a tree, so things in the shade. So it's kind of like not the optimal place to put a solar panel. The panel was supposed to be up on some kind of a pedestal that would work out, but it's got a fence around it to keep the kids away from it. But the kids have to use the water, and the water spigot's right there inside the fence. So the thing was kind of messed up, But anyway, it worked out. I mean, they did have running water afterwards. So this thing attaches to this tank that we got there, and then just fills it up during the daytime, and then it has running water. But the tank was just put next to it. It wasn't elevated, which it was supposed to be. But the system worked. I mean, it worked okay. The problem is we would go there for like 2 or 3 weeks in December. Then like it was up to whoever we could find to do it, And basically that wasn't that easy to do. We got some people from the university there to help out, but it wasn't that reliable. Like this setting up a system where you can actually do that, it's pretty difficult. And a well is dangerous because you have to worry about the water quality, and there's animals around and stuff, so there's potential of bacterial infection in the well and things. So anyway, I found some people there that did wells, like an NGO, like a Catholic NGO that was doing just wells. They helped us out a little bit, but in the end, and it worked, but basically it's pretty difficult to do that kind of thing. That's kind of the tap for it. This shows the way the tank and the thing was set up, and it wasn't optimal, Basically it was functional. And this ends up being the tap that they had for the kids. So they could wash their hands then at least. So that's an example of like whatever number 2 or whatever here. So it had an inverter, AC pump, and then pumps into the tank. You don't have any battery storage. That's pretty robust. I mean, that thing's still working. So it's kind of like, it looks like it's kind of falling apart, but basically that still works. So it's better than not having water. And it's better than running diesel generator, which is the other option. But when you ask them, would you rather have this set up or a diesel generator, they say diesel generator, because they don't believe that this can possibly work. They don't kind of understand that you could do that. See, there's plenty of room to do that kind of thing. The question is, like you said in the homeworks, like long term, like so you can impact the one village and help the kids. But long term, is it really changing things when you have the actual situation is that, like in the field over here, all that green is drug plants growing and for export. Like they'll fill up these brand new trucks, like kind of smaller than a semi, but something, whatever you call it, box truck. And they'll drive from here to Somalia, and at the border, they swap drivers, and they swap trucks and they swap drivers. So they have like a little mafia that's doing this, So all brand new trucks, there's a ton of money, And then they take it to Somalia, and then that goes from Somalia. It's distributed all through the Arab world, like this chat is stuff that everyone in the Arab world chews it. It's kind of like a stimulant, but it's also addictive. So it's a little bit like cocaine. It's not. I don't think it's as strong as cocaine. And you do see people that are like addicted to chat, walking around naked in the streets, kind of mumbling to themselves. So it is something that doesn't seem like a great idea, So so anyway, so yeah, so that's without batteries what you can do. So the batteries you need in a system like this aren't, all right, you can use car batteries, and people in Africa use car batteries for it, but the best kind of batteries, like called a deep cycle battery, and usually they're using a lead acid because it's cheaper. And basically, car battery is like, just, you only need to use it for like 10 seconds to turn the motor over, and you need to dump a load of power from it. All right, so in this kind of deep cycle battery, you need to drain it out for a long period of time. Again, all night, you're going to be using the battery to run your house. It's basically, it's got to be discharging over a long period of time. So it's a different kind of use cycle, which means that the electrode is going to be shaped differently. Like the car battery has like, it's going to have like porous electrodes, different than the car battery is like solid electrodes. And then I think some of the designs of it are different, like the spacing of the electrodes and things are different. So basically, you need some kind of custom batteries for this kind of application. It's the same kind of battery they use for forklifts and things too, though. Like a car battery is the same kind of deep cycle battery. So there's some kind of specs in the batteries here. So anyway, the homework this week is to kind of design something that we did actually, but get over here. So it's like so it's for making electrifying a little clinic, right? So they have, in fact, the Cubans built some of these clinics. So and other people have built clinics across Ethiopia, but the problem is there's no big problem is there's no electricity, so they can't store things like vaccines in them. So they have like traveling nurses, like quote unquote nurses, some kind of medical person travels around. They'll visit these little clinics and villages. But if you don't have like electricity and a refrigerator to store vaccines and whatever else they need, and lighting things and computers, then they won't show up at the place. So you can draw the medical help that you need for the village by electrifying the clinics that they already have, which have already been built by people. Basically, some of them by the Cubans and some just by NGOs that build like kind of little huts, you know. So it's kind of like half-finished projects all over the place. Anyway, so this is an example of that. Like you want to just electrify it, which is something we did. So basically, you want to run it like 24 hours. You want to run like a computer, maybe a printer, whatever you need for a medical office, you know. And then these places can be like the center of attention in a little village. So it could be almost like a town hall in a sense, you know. So you could have something like, the idea we had was that we could get like a projector and we could like watch movies or something, you know, so somehow get a projector, like an LED projector and a computer, like a laptop, and then just, they might get more out of that than the clinic, you know. So so that's the idea, is to like we did this, so electrify the place, put batteries in, buy a couple things like a vaccine refrigerator. You can buy a DC vaccine refrigerator on Amazon, fan, LED lights. You can get all this stuff on Amazon, I think. So the idea is like price this out and see, like design this thing and price it out and see how viable that is. And the way to do it, you need to figure out, like for the place where you are, like what's the peak sun hours, like how much. So peak sun means that the sun is, so there's a conversion, like at the sunset, you won't get as much power as when the sun's straight overhead. Right, so there's like a peak sun. So you can convert the total day into number of peak sun hours. In Ethiopia, it's 12 hours, but around here it's like 6 hours. Right, so it depends on the angle of the sun. It depends on the season. It depends on the weather, everything. So you average for the whole year and see like what this is going to be. Then you have an idea of like how much a given solar panel with a given arrangement with respect to the horizon, like angular arrangement, how much it will produce. right? And then so you can figure out how many solar panels you need, and then you can figure out from the consumption how many batteries you need, what size inverter. So you figure out the whole system based on the consumption on this idea of like the peak sun hours that you have. And you give yourself a buffer because if solar panels here generally tend to end up covered in dust. I don't know if you can see, so that's going to cut the power of this thing significantly. I don't know if that picture is in here somewhere. There's a lot of dust. Like you can see there's dust all over this. So maybe that's cutting 10% of the efficiency of that. But if you're, there's another picture of a different setup where it's really covered in dust, and that's like 25%, right? So it's basically, you have to kind of buffer your whole calculations by that. So there's a lot of choices in terms of batteries, but generally, so they're almost always sealed cells now. The old batteries, you had to, they were open cell and you had to fill it. You had to put water into it, right? But now they're like sealed cell batteries, and you have they're basically they're filled with a gel instead of water, so that it doesn't evaporate, right? And then part of that is like if you, depending on the charge controller that you have, if it overcharges the batteries, then you produce hydrogen and oxygen. So you have to kind of balance off like the charge cycle that it's going through and how that's going to work, you know. Anyway, so yeah, so basically, so the batteries are sold by amp hour or by kilowatt hour. So amp hour, you have to multiply by voltage to get the actual. So for a fixed voltage, amp hour would give you kind of kilowatt hour if you multiply by voltage. It would give you the power that the thing had, total storage power that the battery could have. So how many amps times the voltage, how many hours of that production, energy production could you get out of that battery? Right, so that's like the storage power of the battery. And so so it'd be 12 volts times 20 amps gives the watts, which is the power unit. So these things have a behavior that if you consume the energy faster, you get the depletes faster. It's like it isn't a fixed thing. Like you buy a tank of gasoline and you can go like so many miles. It depends a lot on how fast you drive. I guess it's the same with gasoline, but basically it's the same here. Like you have so many amp hours or so many kilowatt hours in the battery. It depends on your use cycle, like how many hours of use you're actually going to get out of it, right? So these things can be kind of figured out. There's basically programs that do these calculations for you for this kind of system. But I don't have those, but basically it's kind of done. Even the setup of the solar panels is done with a computer program now. And it can tell you basically the peak hours that you have in a given location. So yeah, so the batteries, I'll go through the batteries kind of more extensively, like the types of batteries, and basically batteries is a whole section in here. I have a whole talk just on batteries. So this is just to say like batteries, period. Deep cycle is what you need. I guess that's the point of this. And then and you need to worry about degassing. Like if you overcharge the battery, it just starts producing hydrogen. So that's something that you need a kind of a charge controller for, right? So the charge control is going to prevent electricity from going back into the solar panel. So it only goes one way. And also it's going to prevent the battery from getting into this condition where it's overcharging, right? And it starts producing hydrogen. So the charge controller, you can get different kinds of charge controllers. right? So, and then it's going to feed into the load of the house, right? So that's kind of the one circuit that you can use for the system, right? Series battery load solar cell. Anyway, so the all these components of it are going to be based on the array you can set up in series or in parallel, so you can get different voltages out of it. So depending on how far you have to transmit it, the higher the voltage, the less loss in the transmission. So you can set up your photovoltaic array so that you have the highest voltage you can possibly get, depending on the distance you have to go to the use, right? And then the charge controller, you can have a voltage converter, right, to get the voltage that you want in the house, or you can just feed it into an inverter and make AC from it, right? So anyway, so you can pick different charge controllers. Basically, this homework is just kind of shop around and see what you can find, and then see how you can piece this thing together. It gives I think it gives kind of a spec'd out, or no, you have to calculate what your usage is. So this could be tedious. So you're gonna have to figure out like what the usage is, both in terms of time. So you need to know your peak usage, and then get that guy. So whatever, it tells you what you need. So you have to look up those things on Amazon, figure out the power consumption from those. And then the refrigerator, let's see, some nuances to this. Clinic needs a vaccine refrigerator. So the refrigerator is spec'd out at a certain power usage, but that power is only used intermittently. Like it'll say like 10 watts or something for the refrigerator, but it's not actually using 10 watts continuously. It's only when it cycles to cool, right? So how much it cycles depends on what the room temperature is and how often you open the refrigerator door. But basically there's some kind of estimate, which you can Google, of like how much of that wattage you actually need over the day. But when you're actually using the refrigerator and you're using like a coffee percolator and a blender, so all those wattages would add together at that point. Like that power consumption could peak out to a huge number, right? So you have to worry about it, the wattage of the refrigerator in terms of a single moment in time if everything was being used at once. But you also have to consider that isn't being used for the whole day. Because if you calculate your energy consumption on the refrigerator constantly running, it's going to be way too high, like by a factor of 10. Right, so basically the refrigerator is kind of a weird thing. The fan you can figure out, it's not going to run all the time. The same with the LED lights and the computer. Laser printer also is going to chew up a lot of energy. The kettle to boil water uses an incredible amount of energy too. But again, if you calculate the kettle wattage and say like 24 hours a day, then you're going to be like 100 times too much power. Because you're only going to use the kettle for like a minute to heat the water, maybe 2 minutes, right? So, but you could potentially have the kettle, the laser printer, and the refrigerator all running at once. The system has to accommodate that kind of power, but not for the whole day. So you can see what you're gonna have to do is map out like during the day what my peak usage is and what my usage is through the whole day, and kind of how the system could fit into that, right? So anyway, if you actually do that, I don't know. We'll see what happens. But basically, that's the idea here, is to figure out like the nuances of this as much as you can. So yeah, if you get the watt hours per day, but you also need the peak watt hours to figure out actually how this thing's going to work. And then if you figure out the peak sun for some place like Harar, Ethiopia, and then I think it's about a number something like 12. And then if you find panels multiplied by the 12 hours to get the, because you figured out up here watt hours per day, and then you can figure out what the panels can do with 12 hours of peak, and then assume 60%, 40% is taken by the dust that falls on the panel, say, and then figure out how many solar panels you need. It'll be about 8 to do this whole thing. 4 to 8, something like that. So it shouldn't be more than that. And then figure out, then put it together, like buy the parts, like get a list and buy them and see what the total price is going to be. So then if you wanted to do this, first you'd have to go beg for the money from somewhere, which you can do. We got the Rotary Club paid for this stuff. We got a key to pay for it, some of it. We've got, like, you can solicit money from people. Actually, for these trips, we would get, actually, people made money for these trips because you could get support to go on the trip from a bunch of different sources. Like the school would pay some, the department. If you summed it up, it actually ended up being more than what it cost. So people actually made money, the students, you know, because they handled some of the money themselves. So, but anyway, it's possible to do this kind of thing if you want to. You know, the embassy paid for some too. The U.S. embassies in Africa will pay for citizen diplomacy grant. They'll just give you money if you talk to them. If you're a student and you're working with other students in Africa, like your peers, then the embassy will give you money for things like transportation, whatever. Yeah, so there's a lot of sources for money to do this kind of thing. Whether it's worth doing it or not is another question, you know, but it's interesting to do, but like the benefit is kind of, you wonder when they have all this money from the chat plants going in, and you're putting in the wells for the barefoot kids, and none of the chat plant people think like they could put a well in for the kids. And they're like, what? And they're kids, you know, it's like, so, I mean, makes you really wonder like what's going on. But anyway, so anyway, the idea here is just to see how this will work out, and then think about the logistics. Like I said, you're going to have to hire someone to dig a well or to do whatever. Like most of this, all right, there is no hospital and there's no way to get to a hospital. So if you fall off the roof, like whatever you can do for yourself, that's about it. You know, maybe there's somebody, there's no, like you're putting a thing in a clinic because they don't have any like nurses that show up, or quote unquote nurses, right? So, and there's people with like limited training in medical. So if you actually hurt yourself, you're kind of out of luck. And the going wage that people are happy to work for is $2 a day. It's like, I mean, you can get people to do anything you want, like basically for nothing. It's like, why would you risk your life, like climbing on a roof or something, right? If you didn't have to. I mean, it's like, for instance, nobody buys a washing machine, you know, because everything's washed by hand, by manual labor, and people are happy to do it. So everything is done by manual labor. Like you can have as many kind of servants as you want, you know, to do whatever you want. I mean, so it's kind of like a different mentality, you know. So there's some disadvantages, some advantages, I guess. But anyway, so the point is, like in number 4, like you're gonna probably hire people to do most of the stuff because you wouldn't necessarily need to do it yourself, you know. So and also it helps them a lot more if you give them $2 a day. Like it's going to actually both benefit them in terms of the clinic and electricity, but it's also going to like give someone a job to do something. So you're benefiting multiple aspects by doing that. So it's actually better to do it that way. But setting that up and managing that is a nightmare because it's in a different language. They speak some English, and then like basically it's hard to tell who you can trust and things like that. So things get complicated, right? And you have to source all the different parts. So you can't use, generally in Africa, you can't use a credit card to buy things online and have it shipped to you. That doesn't work. Like they don't trust credit cards because of Nigeria, like all the credit card things. The entire continent, like you can't buy anything online. So everything has to be mailed, and mailing and going through customs is a big nightmare. So the best thing is to find a source in country that has already worked out most of the problems, and then just buy it from them and pay them whatever they want for it. Because that's going to be absolutely the simplest thing to do. So basically, any price you get here, you should multiply by 2 to cover whatever. Basically twice is what it will cost. And then you can kind of think that would be reasonable. And then the logistics of organizing it, like number 4 is probably the biggest part of the problem. You know, because you can find people there that are really bright, they can set up the whole thing for you, in fact. And it costs nothing to do it. But basically, can you trust them or not is what the big issue comes down to. Is this actually gonna reach fruition? Anyway, why don't we quit there? I'll be more coherent on Thursday. For the stuff, so. All right, thanks.